Yeah, so help us
Yeah.
wrap our heads around this a little bit. This idea that the guru is all that is, but also more than just like one being, one
These are big
person.
concepts. Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
but I
first of
know that's coming up for some people who are listening, just to like
oh,
get a gateway into like, well, why are we telling stories about this person?
well, that's a big question. First of all, just the word guru literally means the remover of darkness.
Mm,
And what a lot of people think of guru as, oh, my golf guru, or, my, calling my
yeah,
spiritual teacher a guru. And that's what in India we learn to think of as teachers, the gurus. But then those are upagurus, those who sort of show you the way, show you how
yeah,
to do what it is you need to do. But then there's the Satguru, and Satguru means truth. So that is the guru that removes the darkness from understanding the truth of who you are.
I love that.
And that essence can be embodied in a being. I mean, there are so many saints and so many different traditions, and that is what you would consider them. Somebody who has that essence of unconditional love, who has that ability to remove the darkness of your ignorance that hides from you the truth of who you are. Um, but of course, as I believe it was either Ramakrishna or Ramana Maharshi, one of those other Indian saints, who said, God, Guru, and self are one,
Hmm.
which means when you come into that space of truth, of the ultimate truth of who you truly are, that essence of who you truly are is the same as that essence of who that Satguru truly is, which is the same as saying God.
Hmm. Yeah, because
Does that help?
yeah. I mean, I guess just from the logic of like if it's all one, that makes a lot of sense. But it seems like Ram Dass and folks who were around Maharaji sort of spoke almost like this ineffable energy that just immediately existed. Like that in itself caused some of these revelatory feelings, like just being
In the presence
in
of,
the
yes.
I guess I should ask first, like what is your story, your history with Maharaji?
Well, I met Ram Dass back in 1969 and spent the summer at his father's farm during that famous summer of 69.
Yeah.
And became his secretary. I was listening to his replies on tape to all the snail mail he was getting at the time, back in the day, and that's how I started learning what all this was about. I mean, I had been brought there by a guy I met at a party who said, "You want to go meet a saint?" and
Sure.
that, and it was 3 weeks before I had taken acid for the first time, and so I was, 3 weeks before I would have said, "Forget it, they don't exist." But after that experience of oneness that I had on the acid, I was ready for anything. So,
Mm.
and when we met Ram Dass, all I could see was light coming from him. And by the end of that summer, it was like all we wanted to do was go to India and meet the being that had done this to Ram Dass.
Yeah,
We wanted,
yeah.
go to the source of where this was happening. And 2 years later, I was in front of Maharaji. And it
Mm.
was the same time that Ram Dass was there. I was there during his second trip to India.
Mm.
Yeah.
And
And
and tell us about your experience there a bit. I mean, not to summarize the whole experience, but like, here's what I'm getting to is I remember when Maharaji and Ram Dass first met. And initially, Ram Dass speaks about his skepticisms being in the back, just like, look at this. And then, of course, the famous story of how Maharaji just burst him open with the story about his mother, which
mhm.
is on the Ram Dass album that we worked. He tells that story. Uh, so in some ways, it's a nice story because it's a bit of a miracle, right? It's like a very clear cut. How did he know that? And it just breaks through all the shell of disbelief.
Right.
But I know for it comes in many shapes and sizes. The way people are cracked open. And I'm
Right.
curious what your experience was like initially when you arrived.
Well, I actually met Maharaji before I got to India. Just
Mm,
like the stories in the book, um, Ram Dass had given me a little black and white picture of Maharaji when in New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire malas of the wooden malas. And after the summer was over, and I was living in New York, and I went to a friend's house, and we split a tab of acid, and um, the next day I was still having sort of astral problems, people reaching up for help, things
mm,
that were getting a little scary. And Ram Dass was in Lama at the time, so I couldn't get in touch with him. They had no phone back then.
mm,
and and I hadn't yet met Hilda, who became sort of my first meditation teacher. And so I sat in front of this little picture of Maharaji that Ram Dass had given me, and I kept saying, "I'm scared, and you've got to help me. I'm scared, and you've got to help me." Sort of like the section in Whisper in the Heart. That's just a cry for help.
yeah.
And suddenly the picture sort of dissolved in blue light, and I was able to see Maharaji sort of moving in that picture or behind
Hmm.
that picture or whatever you want to call it. And it was just instantaneous. And I suddenly felt like, okay, everything's fine. I can lie down and go through the rest of this trip, no problem. So, needless to say, after that, I got a much larger picture, and I used to speak to this picture all the time. I used to talk to Maharaji, and sometimes I would think that I would see him there. When I finally got to India, one of the first times I was with him, he said to me, "You used to talk to my picture all the time. You asked many questions."
Wow.
And I
Yeah, I
didn't go
mean,
around telling people I talked to pictures, you know?
I was thinking about Maharaji this morning, and because I was just here by myself rehearsing for this tour, and I'm really frustrated, and I'm swearing to myself, and I was like, I felt a pang of like, this is ridiculous. And like, I felt like, oh, I almost like swearing is low, like it's I don't know. I just had this weird guilt and shame came up, and then I remembered it's like I'm pretty sure people have told me Maharaji swore like a sailor, which makes no sense to me. But is that true?
Yes, absolutely.
In
He used to basically call us sister fuckers. Um,
it makes me so happy to hear that. It's almost like, why not? What does it matter? It's just all play. It's like it's just that's just stuff. Like
it's
it's
I
not.
yeah. I mean, you got to understand. Hanging with him, he was so funny. He would make us laugh all the time. I mean, he was not a teacher in the sense that he taught. I mean, there was no lecture,
Yeah,
there was
yeah,
no curriculum, there was nothing we had to do. We hung out, literally. He would talk
yeah.
about Ramdev tells this wonderful story about he and Mohan being in this group of Westerners around, or Indians around Maharaji at one point, and Maharaji asking Mohan, "What's the price of milk in America?" And Mohan gets into this whole conversation with him about how much milk costs in America. And Ramdev is sitting there thinking, what are we talking about here? I mean, this guy's
Yeah,
supposed to be a saint.
let's get to
What?
spiritual
Let's get
stuff.
to
Yeah,
the spiritual stuff.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden he realized that what, all that was happening was the mind was busy chattering about milk. And underneath that was this total bliss that he could just sit in, and it had nothing to do with the mind. And basically, what Maharaji was showing us and being for us was the path of bhakti yoga, which is the
yeah.
devotional yoga, which is why you have people doing these pujas and these ceremonies and these sort of worshiping of Maharaji as the representation and the embodiment of that state of being that we want to get to that sat place of truth. Yeah.
So I'm hearing you say like the devotion to this individual is a bridge or a mechanism for the larger Atman, the devotion to all, the
Right.
bhakti,
Absolutely.
the it's and he his. incarnation, in a sense, was just exploding with not much there besides that, in a way. So I mean, everything I could understand maybe why he'd be so a lot full of humor, because it's like, well, why not? It's just playing around with identity and
Right.
personality, and uh,
Well, he was very different from, I mean, other gurus in India would have, the men sitting on one side and the women on the other. There'd be all these rules and sort of regulations about who could touch what and who could do
mm,
what. Maharaji had none of that.
mm,
There were no, it was just love. It
mm,
was simply just love. And Dr. Larry, brilliant, talks about it that way, where he said, while sitting in front of Maharaji, of course you felt this enormous love. I mean, that was his job. He was a saint. It was his job to love us all. He said, the
yeah.
real miracle is when I sat in front of Maharaji, I loved everyone.